Ladies and gentlemen, the IBA International Conference on Marketing over the years has been graced by the most notable of personalities from the marketing arena. ICM 2014 has been engaging you with the most exhilarating of sessions, and as we move towards the final few hours of the conference, we hope that your experience so far has been an enriching one. Next, we bring to you a personality who has made a significant impact on the Pakistani landscape. From graduating with degrees in computer science and management from MIT and Wharton, from holding faculty positions at the Sloan School of Management, MIT, and the Western Michigan University, to name a few, he has been the Dean of the Suleiman Daud School. We are honored to have with us today Dr. Javed Ghani. Dr. Javed has made profound Dr. Javed will be enlightening you with the talk on Pakistan's emerging middle class. Thank you.
After lunch, I've also got to figure out how to work this. Okay, very quickly also in terms of my own background, I started off in market research and was a co-founder of Gallup Pakistan back before the millennials. I guess the Generation Y was not born. That was back in 1978. And so have sort of seen work, market research sort of develop in the country. Have also been chairman of the Punjab IT board, and I'm also on the board of NADRA. So I've been working with data for almost 30 years now. Let me just give you a minute as to why I chose this particular topic and why I'm interested in this topic, which is how Pakistan... Can you go back? In terms of data, we often sort of talk about there's a lack of data in Pakistan. And the numbers about population, SECs, consumption, you see a whole set of data being reported in the New York Times, in The Economist, in Business Week, international journals, and international magazines, publications. But sometimes the numbers on Pakistan are often missing, and sometimes when they are there, are wrong. When I say wrong, it's simply that when you look at other data sources, you find that there's a big gap. First of all, in what is known and what is reported, and what needs to be known. So for many years, I've been thinking of how to sort of help sort of rectify that sort of gap or fill that gap. So this is over the last 1 year, I've been working on, first of all, trying to understand how the middle class has been measured, reported in other countries. What are the source of data when we talk about the Chinese middle class, the Indian middle class, the American middle class? Exactly what are the data sources? So that we can see, are those data sources even available over here? And to try to triangulate. In other words, you look at the same numbers, same information from multiple dimensions. So you sort of see, is remittances coming out roughly the same as what household surveys are being reported? Are cars which are owned coming up consistent with car sales being reported? So there's a whole bunch of ways. Is sugar consumption similar to what sugar is being imported or produced? So there are multiple ways by which you can triangulate. You see, what is Nielsen reporting? What is Gallup reporting? What are surveys of the Pakistan government reporting? What are multinationals who are really making real dollar investments? What are their forecasts? And how do they see the economy? Especially companies which are working across countries. Companies which are working and investing, let's say, in North Africa and India and Pakistan and Malaysia. So they have their own measures. And I've worked with several companies who have been, in a sense, who are giving data to multinationals across regions, across countries, across the region. And since in a sense, it is apple-to-apple measurement. So in a sense, when I'm looking at, let's say, Malaysian data and Pakistani data, you're looking at what's the comparison. So in the next 20 minutes, I hope to sort of try to give you a flavor of a set of things. Let me start off by talking about a term which I'm still finding difficult to, first of all, I'm not sure how to use this. Okay. Kashif, right? Kashif introduced us to this word, excepting he used the word baby boomers, I'm using the word ancients. And ancients are the people, I think, over 55. And among the people who put up their hand, I was among them. So there are ancients, and then we talked about the generation X, which is basically 35 to roughly 55, 33 to 55. And we had guesses yesterday as to what they were. And then we talked about generation Y, which is the millennial, which is most of you kids or folks, accepting that. And what is our guess on this? I think, so let me just give out the answers rather than spend too much time. But the guess is that it's about 5% of the population of Pakistan are aged myself. Indeed, I'm approximately at over 60, roughly about the 3% of Pakistan. Okay? So if there were 10 people over here, 100 people, I would be among the 3. Okay? If there are 4 people in Pakistan, okay, then 20%, 25% are the 35s and above. But the interesting thing is that you who Kashif said were the young folks are for Generation Z, uncles and aunties. Let me say that again, because most of you are not used to people calling you uncle or auntie, right? I remember when I was 25 or 30, when somebody called me uncle, I was like, maybe uncle who, you know, but the point is that very soon, Generation Z, which is under 20, which is half of Pakistan, will be calling you uncle and auntie. So actually, everybody in the room is actually old by the definition of Pakistan. Everybody in this room comes in the 50%, the older half of Pakistan. The younger half of Pakistan is not in this room, I think. Okay? So everybody is old. It's important to understand this, and some are ancient. But it's this very basic set of information. When I got into market research, I would ask sort of marketing directors at some of the leading companies, you know, who is your customer? And unfortunately, you know, people were totally off. How many of your customers in the rural areas? What is a rural area? You know, is this town a rural town? The fact that urban Pakistan consists of, we often think about urban Pakistan as consisting of what, 20 cities, 30 cities, 50 cities, 100 cities, 200 cities. Urban Pakistan consists of 500 towns and cities. 500. There are another 45,000 villages. So when we think about rural Pakistan, actually we are thinking about urban Pakistan. And a lot of numbers, a lot of companies just don't understand what's going on over there. So now let's sort of take a peek. So the topics that I'm talking about is the significance of the middle class, the share of wallet, where do people spend money? Because ultimately, if people are trying to buy an iPad or a mobile, they're spending something less on something else. And one wants to understand how baskets of goods sort of go up and down. When a shock happens, when a financial sort of shock comes to a family, somebody becomes sick. I need 20,000 rupees because my father's sick. Where do I cut down? Do I cut down on cigarettes? Do I take a loan? Do I sell Bhasko? Do I sell the buffalo? What do I do? When there was this flood, I was in the Punjab government and we were trying to evaluate how consumption behavior would change and how there was a whole set of policy issues. And the understanding as to how people react to either external or micro shocks in the family is very important for marketers. It's very important for government also. So partly it is understanding, and this is a topic not just of economics, but also of marketing. In a recent journal marketing paper, there's a series of papers on how people make trade-offs. In the recent recession in the US, how have people sort of, have they sort of cut down on positional goods? You know, what have they cut down on? What has increased? And then how do we measure? Is there a rural-urban difference? Of course there's a difference, but what is the difference? And then can we peek into the future? What can we think about what might be 2020? When most of you ancients might be gone from this room, from the earth, but the millennial Y will indeed be called uncles and aunties, right? Okay, so the significance, I still know how to figure this out. I'm used to walking up and down, so I guess I have to. Can I have a microphone? Okay. So what we have is. Hello. Okay. The situation we have is that There's a major problem right now as OECD countries, G7, are worrying about the impact of the global financial crisis on spending. And there's a major forecast at Brookings, at A.T. Kearney, at MIT, at a number of research centers as to what the outlook will be in 20 years. Who will be buying the mobiles, the fridges, the refrigerators, the cars being produced by mostly China 20 years from today? Who will buy this? If there is indeed an aging population over here, as indeed a lot of the Western economies may have an aging population, a dwindling population, who will be buying things? And basically what we have is basically China and India. Indeed, India is considered the major the bulge which will be coming up in 2040. Okay? When you look at Pakistan over here, Pakistan doesn't exist. In all the studies I've seen, Pakistan, the failed state, it doesn't even feature, even though it's number 7, number 8 in terms of population. And I've tried to understand where Pakistan might feature in this. Will it even be a color, or will it not exist over here? Okay, so the basic idea is that that Asia's emerging middle class will be large enough to replace the US as a driver of the global economy. This is serious forecast by very, very serious economists in the next 20 years or 15 years or so. Okay? It also defines the middle class. The middle class is an ambiguous social classification, broadly reflecting the ability to lead a comfortable life. Stable housing, healthcare, educational opportunities, reasonable retirement, job security. That's basically what we're talking about as the middle class. The basic classification, and the literature on the middle class spans many literatures. It's in sociology, in marketing, in economics, in political science also. Because the middle class has an important effect, has different political behavior in terms of their willingness to change and so on, and go on. So basically I'm thinking in terms of consumption, income and wealth. One definition sort of roughly is that the expense on essential goods is less than 50%. And roughly they're spending on discretionary goods, on soft drinks, on festivals, on a whole bunch of discretionary goods, things which you can get by without is roughly about over 20%. The key thing is that your income is secure. It's not just about having income today. It is about having income tomorrow. And that is why the wealth is very important. The portion of your income which comes from assets. And assets are basically either physical assets that I have land from which I'm getting rents, or it is human assets. Getting an MBA degree from IBA, that's a human asset which may have a value in the global sort of economy or in the Pakistan's economy. Okay, so basically they are less vulnerable to economic shocks. They have an optimism regarding the future, preference for moderation and stability as a political sort of issue, willingness to pay a little bit extra, invest in physical and human assets, and often it's been talked about the backbone of the market economy and democracy. It's significant to understand what Pakistan's... Could you just tap the thing? Computer Wali, can you press down? Can you, just because you can do on? I'll simply signal to you. Just go to the next slide, please. Frozen, no? Okay. How do you measure this? And I won't talk too much about this, but basically you need a measure which you can measure across countries and across time. So what they do is that you sort of deflate for inflation, and you have a rail sort of numbers, and you use what is called the 2005 purchase power parity dollar. Okay, that's like a standard measure by which you also measure poverty lines, $1.25. This is daily per capita. So it's roughly about, I think I'll just have to stick to this and kind of turn around. Okay, so we are talking about roughly 20,000 to 100,000 rupees per month of consumption. And I'm defining the lower middle class as $2 to $4. That's okay. And the upper middle class is $4 to $10. And the middle class roughly from $2 to $10 per capita. Next. Next. I think I'll have to stay over there. Okay, the data source is basically a whole bunch of standardized national household surveys, the same data by which estimates of the middle class have been done in other countries. The same question and the same methodology. So it's an apple-apple comparison. So if there are errors in this data, there are probably errors in other countries' data also. The same, and there's a long discussion about the statistical validity, but these are the best what the world uses for studying Gini coefficients, inequality, for studying poverty, for studying middle class, and so on. Next. Okay, so I'll simply talk about, okay, let me simply move ahead. Go ahead. Next. Okay, let me just ask a quick question. So here are a set of durables. I think about 10 durables, some in 3 and 6 and 10. So a person who's sort of at the lowest rung of society. I'm talking about all Pakistan. This is a question for you folks, right, by the way, the people who are in the audience, the students especially. So what do you think is the first item a person purchases? G, mobile. Speak up, speak up. Fan, mobile. Second item, television. Okay, so far we have votes that basically it's a mobile, a fan, roughly, a television. Next item. G, fridge. Next item. Sewing machine. Next. Sorry? Washing machine. Washing machine. G, washing machine. Next. Motorcycle. Next. Okay, the reality is actually pretty good. The reality is next. Is this. The first item you buy is actually a fan. The next item which you buy is a mobile. This is 2011 data, by the way, so 2013 might have changed. So maybe mobile is below that. The next item is indeed, we have a fairly good feeling for Pakistan, at least the people in this room. We do buy a television, then we buy a sewing machine. And it's important to know in which sequence and at what point do you sort of switch. At what income level do you move to the next level up? By the way, there are studies done in Japan, in the US, in the 50s, roughly the same kind of ladder. So you can see the same sort of progression across countries, across decades. And then as a fridge, a motorcycle. Once you've hit the motorcycle, you're pretty much upper middle class. And then a computer, a laptop, an AC, and ultimately a car. Next. Next. Just move ahead. Okay, this is the progression. So this is the bottom 10% of Pakistan, the poorest 10% of Pakistan. The richest, no, sorry, this is at $1. So this is a family which roughly is $1 per day per capita income. Okay, so middle class is lower middle class is 2 to 4, and that's when you start buying your televisions. I don't have the mobile because that's too high, but you buy your television, your washing machine, your fridge. That's what you buy in that order. TV, washing machine, fridge. Next. And then when you get to the upper middle class, you've crossed $4, then you invest in a motorcycle, and you start buying a computer and a car. And of course, when you go above $8, $10, then of course you buy the others. Okay, next. So that's your profile. And that's your lower middle class, which is 44%. But the remarkable thing is that right now, somewhere in the last couple of years, Pakistan hit 50%. 50% of the families in Pakistan are middle class by international standards. That's a very large number. It's a number which is a hidden secret. Some people know this secret. The Asian Development Bank did a study did a comparison, and came up with the number that Pakistan has the second fastest growing middle class in all of Asia. The second fastest growing middle class in about 20 or 30 countries that they studied. Way ahead of India, way ahead of all the other countries. It's a small base, but that's what it is. And that's what the numbers say. It's a secret because nobody seems to know about it. It's very difficult to convince people. It is a very fast growing, and I'll show you some numbers later on. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about roughly an annual consumption of about $6,500. And we're talking about roughly an assets, because this is important. The assets are $35,000, and your asset to expense ratio is 7. So in other words, if I stop earning today, then I'll be able to survive for 7 years without any earnings. That's an important number to understand for the psychology of behavior, purchase behavior. In other words, the assets which I have, if I sell them off slowly, I can live for 7 years without, earning anything. and it's about 13 for the upper middle class. And of course, the upper middle class, you can pretty much not work for the next 2 generations and, survive, and your kids can survive. Okay, the family size goes down, right? The number of children goes down. Number of earners is pretty high. You have 2 earners over here. An interesting thing is that in the lower class, you actually have people who otherwise are not SEC B or C. What you have is 2 labor classes who live together in the urban areas because they want to share costs. So in the lower class, you have actually people who are, in terms of socio-economic classes, actually in the lower rung. But because they're trying to save costs, particularly in the cities, they're saving costs and they're sharing, so their lifestyle is that of a labor class, but their consumption is that of a lower middle class. And it's an important point to understand the details of this. A lot of joint family, about 40% are living with their parents or grandchildren or whatever. Durables owned and so on. Next. How much more time do I have? Who's keeping track? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? 15? Oh, going fast. Okay. Next. Okay, this is what people are spending. So the middle class, from now on, I'll forget about the lower class, I'll forget about the upper class. I'm just talking about a middle class family, which basically has either bought a motorcycle, they already have a television, a refrigerator, a washing machine, a fridge. They are hoping to buy a motorcycle, and if they're somewhat higher in the upper middle class, then they have just bought a small car. Okay, that's your typical middle class which I'm talking about. And that's what they're spending the money on. 8% on basically atta, chawal. Okay? And there's something in economics which is called Engel curves, which are essential goods. It's basically that when your income increases, then the percentage of expense which you spend, the percentage of your wallet. So in other words, if I have my wallet, in Karachi I know it's dangerous to sort of show it, but whatever, it's a thin wallet. But basically, if this is my wallet which I have to spend for the next month. Okay, I'm middle class, I basically spend about roughly, let's say, 60,000 rupees. Okay, 60,000 rupees in this wallet, not so much, but whatever. 60,000 rupees in the wallet. Where do I spend this? To make it easy, I'll make it 100,000. Okay, so I'm in the upper middle class. Okay, 100,000 rupees. I spend 8,000 rupees. Okay, this is 8,000 rupees on atta, but it's going to be downward sloping. So the poorer people are going to spend a bigger percentage of their wallet on, basic essentials, and the richer people will spend less. And the curve is important. For marketers, this becomes very, very important. How do people switch? When I go to the next level of income, how do people switch? When people become from generation X to generation Y and generation Z, how do they switch? It's all about switching consumption patterns and, whether you want to consume now or you want to consume later. Do you want to invest in the future, or do you want to have current gratification? So there's a lot of dynamics, the psychographics of consumption. But these are the very basics. Okay. It's interesting, milk is pretty high. And this, by the way, 9% includes rural areas where the milk purchase is much less. So actually, we later on see that in rural areas, your milk purchase will be actually something like 5%. Because they are getting the milk from their own buffalo. And the urban areas, you'll see that the milk consumption is roughly 12%. And it's interesting that milk consumption remains the same, roughly no matter how much you have. So the person who earns 200,000 rupees will be 10% of the doodh kharch karta hai, which is quite remarkable, or at least that's what the data says. The people, consume India. I looked at the data for India also, by the way. It's very interesting that Indian milk consumption is higher than Pakistan milk consumption. And I was talking to my father, who knows more about India, or some relatives of mine, and they said that because of meat, there's a lot more doodh ki cheezein. Maybe Madam Rona, I think, would be able to sort of say that in India, the number of items which are being made by milk would be much more than Pakistan. That's why the per capita milk consumption is actually higher than this. And maybe later on, we also find, and maybe you can comment right now, I don't mean to, sorry, but I've never asked this question from somebody who's coming from India, and I'd like to do some quick market research based on a sample size of 1, which is not a very good sample, but somehow the number of washing machines in India are much less than Pakistan. And I asked somebody, and somebody jokingly said that Pakistan ki aurtein jo na wo zyada jo na wo aaram pasand hai. But I don't think that's the answer. Somebody else said that the dhobi system in India is much better would you comment? I don't mean to, I know I should be answering questions, but let me just say the comment again. What I'm finding when I looked at the India and Pakistan data, I found that the percentage of washing machines was much higher in Pakistan. Maybe old machines, India mein kam tha. Could you comment?
No, I think it's basically...
This is Rona, who's also right after me talking.
I think it's basically in the urban context because...
This is by the urban rule, I've looked at the total numbers.
But you would notice more this kind of phenomenon in the urban context because they have the opportunity of just having this dhobi which comes and does what you have, the convenience that they have, and they don't want to get into the modern mechanism because that also takes space. The household size of the middle class is very, very small compared to what I see over here because the real estate cost in Bombay or Delhi or one of these places is almost like Tokyo or New York. So you can understand that space is such a constraint. And I have had that problem myself that when I wanted to put a washing machine, I needed to think twice and redo my kitchen because I know that's the space it'll go. So there is a situation which is very different from a consumer angle.
There's a lot of cross-research which could be done actually because this is fascinating. I think ultimately what I'm trying to do is to really look at Pakistan not as, again, this may be a politically dangerous statement, but not as one country, but actually multiple, because Punjab, Southern Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan, and within India, I'm sure, and as I look at the statistics, Punjab, Bengal, UP, Deccan are very different behavior. And to some extent, it is maybe not, as a marketing person, less interesting to look at comparison between Pakistan and India, but actually between West Punjab, Pakistani Punjab and Indian Punjab, or, and so on. And to see where the behavior is different. I think there's so many insights which one can get by looking at, so these comparisons and the kind of insight which you just said, because I've been trying to answer this. I've asked many people this question. The first time I've got something which seems to be a very logical answer, because it is related also to the whole housing size. Okay, thanks. Okay, but we'll get to this point later on as to the fact that we do have more washing machines over here. And I guess what you're saying is not about laziness of women. It is really just a practical issue of tea and tobacco. Now we get into the more non-essentials. Actually, it's not just meat. Actually, it's meat. 6% of the middle class of the budget is being packaged and prepared. That includes beverages, that includes eating out, a whole bunch of things. Fuel is pretty high. And this will increase with the whole subsidies going away, electricity bills going up. If this becomes 10% or 12%, where will it go down? And that's an important point, not just for political, so for policymakers, but also for marketers. If this goes up, and actually when fuel costs go up, transport also goes up, then what happens? What goes down? By the way, rent is very small. It's interesting, 80% of people live in their own houses. And so rent is actually a very small percentage of household expenses. And I'll show the numbers later on. But a lot of these are wages, actually. It's domestic help. And it also includes mobile. So it's any kind of a set of numbers over here. Again, whatever. Education is just 3%. And that's where it is. Medical is 4%. And it's interestingly, it's higher in the rural areas. Because people who don't have access to health, they have to travel. So lots of details in this. Festivals, pretty high, 4%. And I think the numbers in India actually are higher. And it's an interesting comparison to see where the numbers are different. Durables, 3%. Okay, next. Could somebody again tell me what time we have? 5 minutes? Okay. I have another 30 slides to go, so I'll go at about rate of about 2 seconds per slide or something. But basically, I'll just explain one. So this is the blue guys are the lower class, okay? And they're spending on the order of 14% on atta. And the rich folks are spending 2%. Okay, that's how you read this. And that's, in a sense, the gradation. And you can see these are essentials, basically. Next. And that's basically your essential foods. The things which have what are called downward sloping angle curves, which basically say that, the essential foods. Lower class basically is spending 53% on essential foods and down 20%. The middle class is roughly about 40%. Okay, next. And now we have things like ready-made. And as you go up in classes, then your percentage increases. You spend more on meat and ready food. Next. Okay, and so on. We can see other things, but again, there's a lot more to be studied over here. Okay, next. We also want, next, go ahead. Okay, urban-rural differences. This basically is a profile. So out of the 18 million urban households, there are roughly about 15 million total middle class. That's upper middle class, lower class, upper class. So roughly what we have over here is, so we want to think as marketers as to where our segment is. Who is our segment? Is it this? This almost doesn't seem to exist over here, the rural urban class. But, this is, and what we want to see is what will happen in 2020. How will these numbers change in 2020? And I'll get to that in a few minutes. Next. How is income streams different? And you see that income streams, 25% of the income stream in the rural areas of the middle class are coming from agriculture. 84% of the income is coming from employment. And that's a big difference. And that's what you'd imagine, but these are real numbers, specific numbers. Where is the income coming from? So your urban middle class is very different from your rural middle class. Next. What's your occupation? It's pretty much half white collar. And by the way, white collar, I'm including dukandar. And that's, somebody could question it, but in the urban areas, about 25% are shopkeepers. Okay, so whether including in the middle class. But over here, we have mostly skilled agriculturists. So that's our customer. Next. Interestingly, in the durables area, the durables of the urban middle class are much more. Even though their income is the same, their assets are much less in the rural areas. And partly it is because of the very high inflation rates in the urban property areas. So urban property has created much more wealth in the urban areas of the middle class. It's somewhat artificial. But it's interesting how the urban person both spend about 60% of their wealth is in their house, basically. Okay? But there's a big difference. The urban people spend it on appliances, and the rural people spend it on animals. That is a major asset of the rural middle class. And when a shock comes, the rural middle class bhans bej deti hai, or they'll sell one of their durables. And we'll see that in a few minutes. Next. So there's and you can see that when you see the durable ownership, I'm doing an apple-apple comparison. So I'm looking at the middle class in rural areas, the middle class in urban areas. And you can see there's a big difference in that the urban class basically has roughly about 50% more ownership of durables than the rural class. Other than, whatever, that's the numbers. Next. Okay, next. Okay, there's a whole set of measurement issues. I can skip this, maybe people who are interested in this. There's a lot of market research implications. Typically, we have our SEC, which is based on basically your occupation and education of the household head. But like I said, when you have families of mazdoor ikhate reh rahe, the consumption is high, even though their socio-economic status is low. And we want to maybe look at both of them together. But when you look at the numbers, then you basically have what is roughly our A-B class, which is 12% of Pakistan in 2011, is roughly our upper class and upper middle class. Roughly CDE1, which was a surprise to me, is roughly low middle class, and your E2 is roughly lower class. There's a whole set of discussion over here as to whether, especially where you have high inflation countries, where you have large number of retired people, where the education and occupation of the household head or the chief earner is irrelevant, including people who are 8-10% of Pakistan, where people are actually getting income from Dubai, remittances. A lot of our standard socio-economic classification starts failing. And so a lot of countries, including the Nielsen living standard measurement, uses durables, a combination of durables and certain house facilities for measurement. And what I would suggest is to the corporates, to the market research community, to the academia, to work on building a set of non-proprietary indexes by which we can start comparing the economic studies like PIDE, etc., with the market research studies. There's a wealth of information which the economists are doing at taxpayers' money. There's a lot of surveys are being done, but rarely do any marketing people, market research companies use that data. They don't quite understand that data. There's lots and lots of data. And it's a matter of using, but you have to then you need to use the same measures. Otherwise, it gets very, very confusing. Lots of, I think I'm getting people are saying it's 0 minutes. Okay, 1 second per slide, next. Okay, boom, next. Okay, just move to the last slide. Okay, what I'm doing is, okay, just stop, left. Okay, what we have is a comparison between 2001 and 2010. Okay, and basically the middle class increased from 7 million households to 15 million. In the last 10 years, there's been a doubling of the middle class households. The consumption has gone from $50 billion to $98 billion. Okay? That's a very large number. Most of the increase, 90% of the increase in consumption has been caused by the increase in the middle class consumption. Okay? And I've checked these numbers with economists, etc. And your assets have, of course, increased, but a lot of that is artificial because of urban property prices. Next. And a lot of other numbers. And I'm not just saying, I'm not trying to make a political statement, but there's been a lot of change in the last 10 years. Okay? Remittances have grown tenfold. And it's, it was about $500 million to $1 billion of remittances in 2001, and it's grown to about $11 billion. That's 11 times high remittances. And when 1/10 of your 10% of your families are coming in, getting remittance money, that's a very large number. Okay? Motorcycles, it's grown from, almost like from 90,000 to 1.5 million. Cars, because of this light blue, which is a lot of imported cars. Almost 1 million cars are being imported, reconditioned cars in the country. So you have on a whole bunch of indicators, something like a 10 to 12 time growth. I'm not saying the economy has grown, but it's just that somehow people are buying a lot of things. And it shows also in next slide, I know it's minus 1 minute. Okay, next slide, next. It's back. Yes, it also shows previous. Okay, previous. Okay, it also shows when I look at I look at the same decile in previous. Sorry. Okay, if I compare 2001 versus 2010, all deciles. This includes the bottom 10% used to own 10% of them owned a television. 10 years later, 25% a television. So all classes of people, for better or for worse, are watching more television, are buying more television, own more televisions. Same with fridge, same with motorcycles. So these are, and the next slide, same with milk consumption has gone up by 2 liters. It was 37 liters. It's become 39 liters. Chicken has gone up, doubled. This is the actual quantity, not rupees, actual quantity consumed. But wheat has gone down, and that has to do with the Engel curve. When you become a little bit richer, you still eat, but you eat tastier stuff. Maybe burgers or whatever. Okay, next, I'll skip this slide because this is very controversial, but the numbers in green are Pakistan. And when I look at the NSS data, again, India is a much bigger country, and I'm sure Rona will have observations on this, but somehow, and it's 2009 versus 2010, so there's lots of issues, but I tried to make it as fairly as possible, an apple-apple comparison, and the numbers came out very starkly. This number, I think Madam Rona has explained, that it's not that Pakistani women are lazy or something, but somehow in India, washing machines are not the in thing. In Pakistan, washing machines are the in thing even for the bottom 10%. But in refrigerators, in motorcycles, the per capita consumption, the country's poor, people just spend as if there'll never be a tomorrow. Next. I've tried to forecast 2020. Next. Okay, my last slide. I've tried to forecast 2020, and I've made a whole bunch of assumptions on GDP, etc. But roughly, if we take this last 10 years, we are talking about a middle class, which will be 70% of Pakistan. We are talking about $170 billion consumption, and you are talking about a doubling from 5.6 to 17, a tripling of your lower middle class in 20 years, and a 1.3 to 7, maybe a 5 times increase in the upper middle class, and so on. Okay, I'll end on this. Thank you very much. Questions? Gentleman in the blue shirt, millennial.
Thank you, Dr. Saab, for a wonderful roller coaster ride in the last 20 minutes. And looking at your presentation, I feel quite energized, and we've been quite skeptical about the country's future. But over the last 14 years, as you've told, that we've been going into the positive direction. So while you told about the consumptions that have increased over the years and people have been spending a lot of money, can you tell us one or two major things which have put us to the external factors which have put us to this positive direction?
Let me simply request, because I'm also presenting at PIDE in economics and so on. So let me just skip that. The whole external issue as to why it's happened, I think the topic beyond outside this. Maybe after the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
The whole issue is external. It's a long discussion by itself. So if I may apologize, Salman. That's a very rich question, which really I can't do justice to.
Starting, Dr. Saab, over here. Dr. It was a wonderful presentation. It was sort of an eye-opener. As you already mentioned, it's open secret now, but it was hidden secret before. So just a small comment on that, because what we have seen in the last 5 to 10 years, the economy is not growing as the indicator shows, especially on GDP and GNP. But the main fact remains the same, that the remittances has been increased a lot. So how much percentage you think the remittance role is there in the consumption increase?
Roughly about 8%. So actually we can do the calculation very quickly, but roughly of an average family, 8%, again depending on the class, but it's roughly about 8% of your income is coming from remittances. By the way, even if you look at the GDP figures, and within there's something called the private sector, private consumption spending. There's a word over there. That actually has increased by 50% in real terms. So if you take 2001 private consumption spending, which is an economic survey, you look at those numbers in real terms, there's a 50% increase. Of course, some of that it becomes less because of the population increase also. There's been a 30% or 25% population increase and a 50% real GDP increase. But yes, but I would say a lot of it has come to remittances. A lot of it may be to do with the underground economy. So there's lots of things which I don't know. And I'm trying to spend more time with the economy.
Right, sir. In continuation to this question, the last
And sorry, it's also maybe about, maybe marketers just doing a better job. That people are now spending more at the expense of other things which are maybe more important. So they're consuming more, which is not necessarily a good thing. They may be consuming at the expense of the children, which is a lot, you know. So I mean, there's a lot more to be discussed in terms of, but
we have been pointed out the consumption economy since very long. So you are absolutely on the same point of view, sir. The second observation is, if I recall the numbers correctly, 44% was the lower class in 2010, which you were expecting to be 26%. So it's a very big difference in the reduction, 44% to 26% in 2020.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so
lower class. Sir, I'm referring to the columns over there in 2010 and 2020, right? So the upper middle class and lower middle class combined, so it's 12%, 43%. It's almost 55% in 2010, which is going to be 70% in 2020. So it's a big jump in middle class, and at the cost of the lower class. So what are the expected factors?
It's simply that, you know, when people become richer, they sort of go from lower class to upper, because this is a very simple number. It's simply saying that have you crossed the $2 per daily per capita consumption? That's the number. So when you have more rich people, then lower class becomes less, right? It's simply a very simple, in other words, the definition over here is simply based on how much money you spend per day, okay? And the lower class is defined as people, as families where the daily per capita consumption is less than $2 per day, okay? And the numbers are there, and that's based on, that's the numbers. And this is the international standards. I mean, this is what across the world in developing countries is considered as middle class. There's a whole set of literature about what the middle class is in developed countries, because the whole criteria for a middle class in America, what is the need for a middle class family in America is different from what is defined as an absolute essential. What is a comfortable life in America is different from a comfortable life in Pakistan. So in general, there's a lot of literature which discusses that the middle class in developing countries, emerging markets, has to have a different set of criteria, numbers, than what is defined as middle class in the West. And I can't do justice to this in this presentation, but there's a lot of discussion. So literally you can say that when we talk about the global middle class, there really are two different sets of measures. One is for emerging markets, and one is for OECD G7. Okay, I think,
so we could just have like one more question or short question, because I know we all have a lot of questions. Is there any one short question, and then we can...
Yeah. So I have one question.
Please keep it short.
I think maybe
yeah, sure.
Can I take a generation X, ancient?
Okay.
Whatever, sorry, yeah, okay. I don't mean to say, yeah, but I think you have precedence.
Dr. Saab, have you taken into consideration in any time while arriving at this figure that our people...
Just loud.
Hello. Dr. Saab, can you just tell me, have you ever analyzed that this 42 or 43% of the populations earlier on the rural class, they never pay the tax. And if the government impose agriculture tax on their income, there will be a big change in this composition.
Very interesting calculations, including zakat. If you take the zakat, versus zakat on the top 20%, it exactly comes to the level of the poverty level, taking people out of the poverty level. The whole issue of agricultural taxes, actually some of the very sensitive issues are regional differences. So actually this can become a very politically sensitive issue as to which area of the country has changed, South Punjab, North Punjab, Karachi, etc. But certainly the issue, I think a lot of analysis can be done, and I'm working with some economists on that issue, and I think, I think there are very significant issues of taxation policy over here. Let me simply end before I'm thrown out over here. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Javed, for that enthralling session on Pakistan's emerging middle class. It truly is a privilege to learn from an institution that Dr. Javed himself is. Without further ado, I would now like to welcome a professional from just across the border, working as the Chief Group Communications Officer previously with the Indian business conglomerate group known as Mahindra & Mahindra. She is now the Executive Vice President for the Vedanta Group, now and is looking after the communications and the CSR aspect of it. A staunch advocate for strategic communications, she is also the first Indian to be conferred upon the prestigious Sabre Award for outstanding individual achievement. Her being included in the global influential list of the 100 most important in-house communicators is a credence to her renowned reputation as being a global communicator. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the amazing Miss Roma Balwani from India. Miss Roma will be speaking on the business of building brands.
Good afternoon. With this wonderful introduction that I've received right now from my young friend Saad here, I hope I can do justice to what I've come here to speak on. But before I start speaking on how do you build a global brand, I'm just watching the last two sessions I've been hearing. I think we have global brands within our own brands. If it's a Pakistani brand or if it's an Indian brand, I think we all have the makings of a global brand. And why do we say that? Because we are here in our own countries, respective countries, where all the international brands are here. And if you can't face the competition that the global brands give you within your own country, then you can't be a global brand. So the first thing that you have to see, that you build your brand as a global brand in your own home soil. Once you do that and you succeed over there, then you can take your brand global. So ladies and gentlemen, let me first introduce the company that I work for now. I had a long stint with Mahindra & Mahindra. I was here, I think, a couple of months back, and I was invited to do a very quick seminar. I took the audience through what Mahindra's journey of brand building, how we augmented the brand. There will be some glimpses of it over here in my presentation too. But most important is that what is current and what is my challenges to build a global brand for a company that I represent now, which is called the Vedanta Group. The Vedanta Group today is a $70 billion natural resources company. Some of you all must have heard the Rio Tinto Group, which does mining across the world, and we do the same. We do it in India, and we also have a global footprint. But mining has its own set of challenges to build a brand. Mining is something which, as you know, is taking assets out of Mother Earth, and what do you give back to Mother Earth and the communities around it? That is the challenge of any mining brand that you need to build. And we have examples of those kind of brands which have been built very successfully, and today Vedanta as an Indian brand is trying to attempt to do that because they have a brand which exists. They have a brand which exists as a responsible mining brand, and we want to make sure that we sustain that brand and take it global. So let me just take you through a bit of the Vedanta Group, what it does, a glimpse of where they are, and then I'll probably give you a sense of what we have done in India to build global brands. And I see that in the last panel discussion, there was a lot of talk and buzz about social media, about how you kind of mine conversations, which is one part of it. But I think I'm going to really give you all a sense as a practitioner what it means to get all this data together and connect the dots. I think connecting the dots is very important. So ladies and gentlemen, this is a few slides on the Vedanta Group. Let me go to the next slide. Do I have a... Okay, somebody has to tell me which way this works. Okay. Okay, are you doing it there? All right, so I have somebody helping me there. So here's this gentleman whom you say is our chairman, Mr. Anil Agarwal. He started his career, in fact, he's a first-generation entrepreneur. 10 years back, he came into Mumbai to seek his fortune. He came in from a place called Patna in Bihar. I heard somebody here, a young, lovely lady who told me that her family is from Bihar. And he started small, and he came to Mumbai, and he wanted to look at some kind of work. And he came from a Marwari background, which is a community in India which has very good, sound business sense. And I think that worked for him. He started on a small little table in a place called Kalba Devi in Mumbai. I don't know whether you all have heard of it, but it's a very crowded locality where entrepreneurs do all kinds of different small businesses. They are the mushrooming SMEs of India. They all come there to the financial capital to check what their fortunes can take them and where they can go from there. And he's one such entrepreneur. He started collecting scrap from cables. He sold those scraps. And today he stands tall, owning almost, I think, 70% of the shares of the Vedanta Resources. He operates out of London. It's a London-listed company. And most important for this man that I would say, as I met him very recently, is his feeling of connect with every corporate social responsibility activity that the company does. He's personally involved. And I was very surprised to see that his personal wealth, 70% of his personal wealth, is run by or is invested in a foundation called the Vedanta Foundation and runs all his CSR activities in his personal capacity. So apart from being a mining giant, apart from being a company which does a lot of CSR activities, I don't know if you all have heard that in India today, one of the gentlemen here who's doing his PhD in CSR did mention to me that he's heard that our New Companies Act says that we will be having organizations which have a turnover over 500 crores to invest 2% of their PAT towards CSR, and that's become mandatory for India. I think it's become mandatory for India because, like Pakistan, we have the rural population which needs attention, needs to be uplifted, and needs to really grow like any middle class that we can see across South Asia. And I think the government is taking those steps in the right direction. And we as a mining company feel very responsible, and we feel that we need to give back to society. So not only in his personal capacity, but even as an organization, we believe that corporate social responsibility will be the brand building exercise that any sustainable mindset of any organization should be doing. And I think Vedanta is on that journey. They've started the journey a few years back, and I'm sure they'll succeed in that journey, because to build a brand is not all about mining data or looking at the consumer, because our products are not directly sold to the consumer. We are a B2B business, but definitely we need to build a brand. So that's Vedanta for you. That's Mr. Anil Agarwal for you. Some of our world-class assets that you can see in these pictures. We have the smelter in a small place in Orissa. We have the iron ore mines. I don't know if you all have heard or you all have tracked the Indian mining industry. There was a clampdown on mining in India. The Goa mines were shut. The Karnataka mines were shut. They were shut for the wrong reasons. They were shut because they felt that it was impacting the environment. And today the Supreme Court has given a clearance to restart mining, both in Goa and Karnataka, in a calibrated manner. But most important and essentially is how do we sustain the communities around it and how do we protect the environment? And that's something which Vedanta is proud of doing, both in the corporate social responsibility as well as in the sustainability activities. They're par excellence. So that's some of the glimpses of our activities on mining in India. So let me take you through a bit of our philosophy on CSR and sustainability. You're seeing that that's something which the company is very, very focused on. You could take the next slide. So we believe that if you see these pictures, that we believe that it's very important to look at inclusivity, look at sustainability, look at partnerships with the community. So we have more than about 250 NGOs working with us, but more important is that it's not just giving donations, not just philanthropy, it's about getting involved in the society. It's all about sharing with the community. It's all about shared value. I'm sure you'll have all heard about Michael Porter's definition of shared value, and that's what we believe in, that we need to have a shared destiny approach with the community. We need the community to feel that they can be economically independent. So we do programs which are CSR in the initial stages, and they become self-sufficient later. They are promoted by us, they're supported by the government, and finally, they look at livelihood for the communities around, and they become independent projects which are self-funded. So that seems to be the way we feel that the pride of the community is intact. They feel that they're partners, they feel that they're volunteers, and we volunteer along with them. So we spend our time, it's not just the money, and we feel that that's the way building the destiny of the community around you and co-creating that destiny is very, very essential. So that's something which Vedanta does, as well as creating the consciousness in every individual that we do it in a very sustainable manner. You could take the next slide. Sustainability is something which is very mandatory for every organization, not only in India, not only here, worldwide. And these are the set of values that we believe in. The three values that you see over there is talking about responsible stewardship. These are governed by our values. These are delivered in practice through our approach in managing risk, health, safety, and environment. And most important is the ethical business practice. And we also believe in building strong relationships because we have a supply chain which needs to work shoulder to shoulder with us. And our stakeholders are very crucial for building this long-lasting relationship. And the process today is very critical to getting to the last mile, that the community is not at stake, the investor is investing in the right organization, and the outcomes are the way the company should be getting it. So it's not just about what shareholder value you get, it's all about the community value you give. So it's all about adding and sharing value. So we engage with all our shareholders. There was a recent visit I did to our Goa mines, and I met some of these people who had lost, or they thought they'd lost their jobs because the mining was stopped for 18 months in Goa. And I met these people, and each one of them commended the CSR activities which were still conducted for 18 months, And we had invested almost 5 crores on a yearly basis to sustain all these CSR activities despite the fact that the mines were shut. And we felt if we stop any of the CSR activities, they are going to be on a hand-to-mouth existence. We continued with all our health programs, all our education programs for the students, all the other activity where they could have a sustaining livelihood. We allowed that to continue, and we still are continuing. In fact, my next year's budget has enhanced in a place where there's no mining. So you can imagine how the company is humane to give back to society. And I think these are all ways and means that you connect with society and build your brand. So that's the little introduction to a large group, which is Vedanta Sesa Sterlite. Sesa Sterlite is the Indian arm, and that's the company that I work for. Vedanta is London listed, while Sesa Sterlite is listed on the Indian Stock Exchange. And I think it's very fitting to end with the philosophy that Mother Teresa had, that you have to give that loving hand, that helping hand. And I think that's what Mr. Agarwal believes in, and that's what Vedanta does very well. So that's a small introduction to how I have a challenge to build the Vedanta brand, which is a global brand, but needs to really articulate itself. So I'm here today to share the fact that this is a brand which is on the move, and you'll hear more about the Vedanta brand. So let's take you through the nuances, what we need to do to connect and build that brand. As I was introduced as a communicator, and I was also told that I have been very outspoken on using strategic communication. I have noticed that there are many brands which are in India. These are multinationals who come and set up base in India, who understand the nuances of communication, the importance of strategic communications. But I guess the Indian brands are understanding that. They're understanding the importance. I think 9 years back when I joined the Mahindra Group, the brand was just getting globalized. Today, the group is known for the Mahindra Rice campaign that they did. I think last time I spoke about it, we had some of you all in the audience. And that was one of the best brand building exercise that was done by an Indian company. And where did they do it? They didn't go out in the markets that they operate in. They went into the grassroots. They went within the organization. They went and created 180,000 brand ambassadors within the organization. So Mahindra Rice became a way of life. They started and pioneered what was called movement marketing. I'm not sure whether you've heard that term before, but movement marketing is all about creating a cultural movement within the organization, creating that sense of pride of the brand, and then taking it out. So it's an inside-out strategy which worked for the Mahindra Group. We had a lot of work done for 3 years within for internal communications. So building a brand is not about only advertising, campaigns, social media, mining. You have to first go back to the human capital. I'm sure some of the HR managers here will agree with me that if you don't build the brand internally, you can't take the brand outside. And some of the multinationals who come here from outside and they want to build a brand, either in India or in Pakistan, the first thing they have to understand the cultural nuances, and they have to forget, if I may say so, global and become local. I think some of the advertising that you see both here in Pakistan and in India, they have a local flavor. They touch your heart. They touch the raw emotion that you would feel and you would connect to the brand, which may not be the same but when they would use another ad in a Western context. But they understand the culture now. They've probably made some mistakes, but they're getting it right. But the Indian companies or the Pakistani companies, I'm sure, realize the rich culture that we all have and how we would like to mine that and use that effectively, both in communication and in taking it out as a campaign. So that's a need that we have today. Media challenges. How companies have to learn to collaborate with all stakeholders, as well as make sure that they are partnering with you in building the brand. If they don't partner with you in building the brand, then you don't get a brand which they connect with or they buy. So collaboration with wider communities is very important. You don't need to gain subsidies. You don't need to curry favors. Today, that's the only way to do business. And why do we say that? Why is it that we need to look at building brands a little differently? Why do we feel that there is so much of trust deficit which is happening on companies around the world? I mean, I don't need to name so many companies. There are companies across the world who have had a lot of issues that people don't want to take their brand because of reputation. I was here the last time. I was sharing with a dear friend here that there was a very reputed Indian pharma company. And that Indian pharma company, today, their products are not being consumed because the consumer is worried. Consumer is worried where that product comes from. Consumer is worried what that brand personifies today. And there's been a clear drop in sales. There have been a lot of issues with their stakeholders and possibly a situation where the original promoters are no longer there. So it hurts a brand. You have to build what is known as a reputation of a master brand. So as I said, trust is no more a soft issue. It's hardline business. It's something that you need to reckon with. You should make sure that it doesn't become a brand challenge. Any breakdown in capability, judgment, or motive, you will see the trust in a brand destroyed in a moment. And how do we say that? Our friends in the panel were talking about all the conversations which were happening, the engagements which were happening. So your consumers are all there. Either they'll build your brand or they'll mar your brand, and you won't even know. So you need to mine that information. You need to mine that conversation. And that's, I think, what was the essence of the panel discussion that I heard just before lunch. And I realized that there's a lot of work happening here, but what's important is how do you mine that data? How do you take that back into the brand? And how do you build that brand? That's very important. So let me take you through what we did, or what I have seen Indian brands doing, is creating a connect with a very strong master brand, which is very crucial for building trust. Because a master brand always has a lot of sub-brands. It has a lot of companies within companies. It has a lot of businesses within businesses. There are companies which are listed within a mother brand, which unlock shareholder value, but they definitely ride on the reputation of the master brand, because a master brand definitely has to have very strong ethical and moral values, and they will probably have a reflection on your products regardless of any geography that it's present in. And that's how we try to understand our clients. We help them do the right things. We engage in new ways. Social media gives you the most, I think it's one of the best platform. You shouldn't be worried about it. I still remember when we started the Twitter for our CEO, everybody was hesitant. You're going to get a lot of negative flack because you're the CEO, you're exposing yourself to your consumer. The consumer is going to come out there and tell you that whether your product is good or bad. But that's what we want. That's what our CEO said, that let me get that. I don't want it layered. I don't want it coming to me doctored by my executives. Let me hear it from the horse's mouth. Let me hear the consumer tell me that. And I must tell you that that has worked very well. A CEO brand works very, very well to build a master brand. If you have built that very carefully, and it doesn't work when you have somebody else building that brand for you. So if it's a Twitter account and you think that the CEO doesn't do it himself and somebody else ghostwrites, which happens to a lot of CEOs in India at least, it doesn't have the same connect with the consumer. It just doesn't connect because that's not the CEO, that's not him. That is somebody else trying to project him. That just doesn't work. So you have to be careful how you build the CEO brand. And what's important that you see on the slide is it's all about communicating right. It's all about how you communicate and how do you build that communication right. Right from the fact that when you're on the drawing board, when you're starting to build a campaign of a brand or a product or a service, where does your communication strategy fit in? Is it important? Is it strategic? Or is it just a public relations activity which comes later? You have to take that decision as discerning corporates or as discerning students who are going to be future executives or entrepreneurs. How do you leverage communications and strategic communications is very, very vital to build any global brand. And as I said, it's all because of the changing media landscape. Today we have a different set of, if I may say so, animals out there that we don't know about. We don't know what they're talking about. We don't know how they're reacting. We don't know how they're building your brand or not building your brand. So we need to understand that media landscape, how it's so changing and how real time it is. So we have this new kind of, if I call him a journalist, or I call him a consumer, I could call him a student, I could call him a corporate, I could call him anybody. But he's out there evaluating your brand because now he has all the tools to evaluate. It is all about data mining, but after you data mine, how do you connect the dots? How do you bring that research in? How do you understand in this information cluttered world that what is the differentiator of your brand? How would you be known by that one word of your brand, which is very critical? You should be known for that one word. If that one word doesn't give you the confidence of your brand, you'll never get there. How many minutes have I got? Okay, so how many minutes? 5 minutes, okay. So the most important thing is that data mining is very important. Let me run through some of the slides which tell you why data mining. I won't go into the details as we have 5 minutes more. Let's take, so it's all about storytelling, visual communications, proactive monitoring, and the quants, which you saw that picture of quantification and adaptability. You have to be a reflective organization. If you're not a reflective organization, not an innovative organization, you're not going to get there. It's all about data analysis. It's all about creating that, mining that data and collating it and taking it out there. And it's all about social listening. I think I heard that before, that there was a lot of talk on social listening, and social listening has become very, very relevant today because today your brands are consumed differently. Today your brands are no longer the same brands that you had maybe in our times, because then the brand was very simple. It gave you one message and that was clear. Today what the consumer would talk about, a young consumer will see the brand differently. The woman would see a brand differently. The older generation would see a brand differently. So you've got to understand that all of them are on the net. All of them know how to make their choices. So they have to make the right choices. So digital is the way to go forward. You have to make sense of the big data. Big data is nothing but small data, which has now become so huge that I'm told that the largest quantity of data has been created in the last 2 years across the world. And in the last 2 years, if you're going to have that kind of data, you'll need a lot of tools to mine it. So as I said earlier, that digital is the way news is driven, the way brands are built, the way campaigns are brought out. It's not all about bringing them out in television or print, not the traditional media. It's the social media which takes the larger share now. And it's so much more reasonably priced. It's inexpensive. It's not having that kind of large media spends. So campaigns have now become smarter and shorter, but they have the same impact. So there you go. You have three types of people who are wanting to consume your brand, or they are the type of brands that people would qualify them. They're traditionalists, they are digital enthusiasts, and the quants. The quants are the most important. They're a new breed. They're a breed that you need to understand. It could be an 80-year-old man who's sitting on his computer and doing his mining, or it could be a 20-year-old doing the same job. So don't go by the age of the person who's mining your data. Go by what he's mining and how he's mining, and what is the outcome to that mining to your brand. How does it impact your brand? As I said, those content creators are also the consumers. All of you all are content creators and all of you all are consumers. That's just a flow chart, which I think one of the panelists had a company which does that. It's all about how you do data mining the right way. And these are your new media tools which are there out there. Some of them are free. Some of them are used by companies worldwide. There are some of them used by our Indian companies. Some of them are created and customized by companies. And I think one thing about India, that they have learned to do this right, because they've been very, very IT savvy from a long time. So the kind of digital tools that we see in India at the cost that we have, they're really far ahead of some of the Western tools that we have tried and used. And how do they use this? You can see that there are various parameters that you can use this information that you gather. But most important, as I keep saying, that how do you connect the dots to build that brand? That only comes from the creativity which your cultural movement within the organization and the movement marketing that you put in place externally will define your brand. And how can your brand survive in this kind of complex and the kind of world that we live in? These are some of the master brands which have done very well. You've heard about the Mahindra Rise, you've heard about the Tatas, who are known for trust. The Amul brand is always known for their kind of innovativeness as they connect with every milestone that happens within the country. So Amul is out there, if it is cricket, whether it's anything which happens in the country, and the hoarding is there in 24 hours. So you're seeing, I think we have a gentleman here from one of the companies. This is all about the admired brands, and I think the most important thing is you don't need to be a brand which is respected, or you don't need to be a brand which has the highest turnover, but you need to be an admired brand, which are very different parameters for being an admired brand. And the most important is you need to be a breakout brand. How do you become a breakout brand? Some of you all don't have legacies. You can become a breakout brand. Some of you all are traditional brands. How do you innovate and become a breakout brand, which is very important today? And it's all about communications, first, second, third, or last. These are some of the brands, how we have taken it global. In terms of Mahindra, we said we are an established brand in India, and we said that we are an emerging brand outside the country. And that's how we were able to discern and create that niche branding that we wanted for our products. Please go on. I think there's less time to... So very important is that Mahindras have done that. Today Vedanta is also looking at creating that connect with becoming a global brand in the B2B space, while Mahindras did it in the B2C space. And as I said, your whole value chain has to buy in. The whole value chain has to be part of the brand building exercise. And if you don't touch these points, you're not going to be able to build your brand. Some good examples. I'd like to leave you all with a couple of videos. Do I have the time to show a couple of videos? Yeah, okay. So let's show you one of the Tata video and the Google video. Can you show us the two videos? And it's all about how they communicate and how they connect emotionally to the consumer. Okay, so you've got your famous Google, which connects to your country.
लंगोटिया यार सी मेरा लाहौर में हमारे घर के सामने एक बड़ा बाग था। उस बाग का गेट बाबा आदम के जमाने। रोज शाम को हमने वहाँ पतंगे उड़ानी और उसके बाद जाके यीशु के दुकान से झझरिया चुरा के खानी।
झझरिया?
मेरा साहब नमस्ते। नमस्ते, मेरी पोती मुंबई वाली।
Every time I see this ad, it still touches my heart.
हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम। फाजिल स्वीट्स? हाँ जी।
दादाजान, दिल्ली से किसी की कॉल है।
हेलो।
यूसुफ अंकल?
कौन?
जी मैं सुमन बोल रही हूँ दिल्ली से, आपके बचपन के दोस्त बलदेव जी की पोती। याद है बचपन में आप दोनों झझरिया चुरा के खाते थे?
बचपन की गली फिर से कूद फांदे, छोटी छोटी मीठी चोरी गांठ लेके बांधे। एक पतंग सा उड़ता था परिंदों की तरह, परिंदों की तरह, परिंदों की तरह। एक दौर था मन मन मोर था, एक दौर था मन मन मोर था।
पार्टीशन के वक्त हम रातों रात हिंदुस्तान आ गए।
दादू?
यूसुफ दी बड़ी याद आती है।
कागजों की कश्तियों में डूबा रहता था, झांकती खिड़कियों में उलझा रहता था। वो भी क्या दौर था, मन पे न जोर था। एक दौर था मन मन मोर था, एक दौर था मन मन मोर था।
भैया थोड़ा जल्दी।
हाँ जी, कौन? हैप्पी बर्थडे यारा। यूसुफ ओए, ओए यूसुफ, मेरे बल्लू, ओए, यूसुफ यार।
Couldn't have built the brand any better. Can I have the next brand also? Thank you very much. Come. You want to ask any questions?
We're sort of short on time.
That's
so
okay.
we could maybe have them again. Thank you, Ms. Roma, for sharing some valuable insights and for helping us connect the dots. The next keynote speaker that has graced us with his presence is an individual who has a myriad of experience across trade, consumer, and competitive environments in Asia, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Central Eastern Europe and Middle East. With 14 years of rich marketing experience, which includes working with Procter & Gamble, and he's the current director for marketing and commercial operations. Please welcome Mr. Aziz Jindani.
Hi guys, can you hear me? Assalamu alaikum. I think it's a very tough act to follow after Roma, but I try to give it my best shot and see how it goes from there. So first and foremost, before I get started, I just want to take a moment and thank the organizers here, especially Ms. Yasmin Zafar, because there's no better feeling than to be back at IBA. I graduated from here roughly about 14 years back, and to be standing at the same place, of course, the entire infrastructure has changed for better. There's no better feeling to be back here. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. And of course, a lot has changed during these 14 years. I've had the opportunity to work with Procter & Gamble across a lot of countries. And what I'd like to talk about today is, I'm glad it was not decided, but Roma mentioned this word time and again during her presentation, which is movement marketing. So what I'd like to do is that in the next 30 minutes, talk to you about, and I also see Ejaz Mia Saab here, so I want to take a moment to salute him as well, because everything that I've learned on marketing, a lot of that has been contributed by him. So thank you very much, sir, for being here. So I'm going to talk about consumer movements, and what I'd like to attempt in the next 30 minutes, or maybe a little shorter than that, would be to decode how to create consumer movements, or movements that inspire participation and involvement. Of course, there is no magic trick to it, but I've got 6 ways to do it, and I'm going to talk about it, and hopefully it would be interesting. So just to quickly touch upon some of the changing paradigms with consumer movements and involvement, I think the world is changing. I think Roma just talked about it in her own way. I want to touch about the higher call of marketing, which is from selling stuff to creating participation, from interrupting to interacting, and from return on investment to return on involvement, because it's all about how much the consumer is involved with what you're saying. And I think in today's world, somebody was just telling me there are 3 questions that we need to ask ourselves. One is, do I want to see that ad again? And I think Google ad is a great example, that we want to see it again. Do I want to share it with my friends? And number 3 is that, do I want to improve upon it, which is where the user-generated content comes. So you'd see a lot of ads going viral. I think a great example comes from Procter & Gamble Old Spice, where in North America, in the US, we have this campaign which talks about smell like a man, and it starts with hello ladies, and that's gone viral. You'd go on the net and you'd see a lot of spoof going on that, and as they say, imitation is the best form of flattery. So I think that's the torture test for marketers today, which is that, are we creating advertising that is interacting, that is involving, and that is forward-worthy, as we say. Let me just attempt to first define in my own way what a movement is, because we have heard this term time and again. Roma talked about it in the world of an internal context, how you start it from within and take it outside. I think from a consumer lens, at least the way I would define movement is what happens when a big idea inspires mass engagement by the culture. That's what we are looking for, a big idea that really inspires mass engagement. And when we think about movements, often this term can get stuck in this area of social movements, like a movement for change or a movement for charity, etc. But I think there are 2 different types of movements. If you just move on, there are certain movements which are mass participation. And that is a movement that every brand is trying to achieve today, which is that to create something that becomes part of the pop culture. And advertising that transcends the world of advertising becomes part of the pop culture. It becomes part of everyday language. It is spoofed. That is also part of mass participation or a mass movement. And then there are, of course, bigger movements, which are social movements, like the movement for social civil rights, or the movement for change that Obama did, or I think in our neighboring country in India, a program done by Amir Khan on Satyame Vijayate, that is an example of a social movement. So what I'm going to spend a lot of time on is on mass participation, because social movements, of course, you're experiencing it every day in Pakistan on news channels. Everybody is trying to do a lot of social movements there. So I'm going to take the time out today and talk about mass participation movements at a brand level. And as I said earlier, it's about going beyond relevance. It's about creating connections. It's about creating involvement and participation and mobilization, bringing the people out there, talking about your brand, taking the effort to not only see your advertising, but to click a like on it, to forward it and share it with your friends. How does all that happen? How does all that happen? There's, as I said earlier, there is no method, but there are some ways that you can try your luck on in a focused way, and hopefully it would spark a movement. So There are 6 ways that I'm going to talk about, and without wasting time, I'm going to go through each one of them because I've got just 30 minutes and I've got some interesting stuff to share ahead. So the number one way, if you move on, is give them a story that fuels debate. Give them a story that fuels debate. Give the consumers a story that really divides them. A great example here would be what Gillette has done in India, which is they did a campaign called Women Against Lazy Stubble. So the whole idea was to shave or not to shave. And suddenly when you float that topic out there in the consumer arena, you easily find people either for it or against it. So you've given them a debate that can inspire action, inspire involvement, because here is a topic that people want to talk about. Either you shave or you not shave. So that's one great example. I think another great example of fueling a debate is from a social context. When I was working in Singapore, I came across this article on Asian tiger moms. Asian moms have this way of upbringing their children in a way which is very regimented. A 3-year-old would not only know swimming, dancing, violin, would know the alphabets, would know math ahead of the curve, would be off the charts on almost everything because her life is very regimented. And here is an Asian tiger mom. And suddenly, it's such a debatable topic that on one hand you've got the tiger moms, on the other hand you've got the other moms, let's say the sheep moms, though that's not the word, but moms who believe in a different way of upbringing. I think one example that I'm going to share here is how a brand created or fueled a debate or engagement through a debate is from Gatorade. So the example that I'm going to share on the next slide, which we'll play in a while, is Gatorade trying to fuel a debate. The campaign was called Gatorade Replay. And of course, you know that, in America, soccer is so popular, so much part of the pop culture. So they went back in time, and the debate that they wanted to fuel was people who have gone past their 30s, get them back into sports, get them back into fitness, because these guys have almost given up. And they came up with a very, very sticky idea to inspire that debate. The campaign was called Gatorade Replay, and if I'd say anything else, it would just not help the video. So let's play the video and it would speak for itself.
That goes is exercise.
I love this story. It's about a score that hasn't been settled in 15 years on the football field.
Welcome to the 87th meeting between the State Liners of Phillipsburg and the Red Rovers of Easton.
A 27-yard field goal attempt. It's blocked. The whistle has blown. This one is over. A sister kisser.
Time might be worse than a loss. We think we have a score to settle.
Gatorade has chosen to team up with the towns of Phillipsburg, New Jersey, and Easton.
We're inviting the guys from the 93 team to strap on the helmet and the shoulder pads and replay that game to determine the true champion once and for all.
Finally tonight, old high school football rivals.
With the same guys who played 16 years ago?
This is one of the best moments. It will be the best moment in my life other than when my daughter was born.
Replay is a game that Gatorade's doing to prove that once you're an athlete, you're always an athlete.
The original head coaches were invited back.
The original cheerleaders, some of the original band members are going to be there.
The returning players underwent a rigorous 2-month training regimen created by Gatorade's Sports Science Institute.
I lost 57 pounds for this process. Wow.
Throughout the 8 weeks, the documentary content was cut into episodes and posted online, allowing the nation to follow their journey.
I said to Coach, I'm going to kind of come out in sweats and warm up, and he said, no, we go full pads every day. And I'm like, Coach, we're in our 30s. Come on.
15 years away from the game, you're just not going to be able to get that kind of finesse in a day.
Your eyes are certainly showing concussion.
A lot of people out there saying you can't do it. Let's prove them wrong. 1, 2, 3.
10,000 tickets sold out in 90 minutes.
Everybody is so down and so depressed, and this was such a lift.
Gatorade athletes Peyton and Eli Manning joined as assistant coaches.
The field temperature right now is at 100 degrees.
In the most oppressive of conditions, there were no major injuries, no heat exhaustion, and no broken bones. Talk about the ultimate product demonstration. 160 million media impressions followed, including being named one of CNN's top stories of 2009 and a 6-page feature in Men's Health. Nearly every major movie studio has shown interest in creating a feature film. And Replay is now a documentary television series. The 1-hour premiere aired nationally on Fox Sports Net to its 90 million subscribers in prime time on Sunday night, Thanksgiving weekend. Gatorade's Lineup Finder allows former athletes to reconnect with teammates online and nominate their original high school teams.
Here is an example of going back in time, and they, of course, the sound wasn't great, but I think what they went back in time, they picked up what's part of the American pop culture is football. So they went back in time, got the two teams who were tied 15 years ago in a university match, got the same players, the same coaches, and created this replay campaign. And it fueled a debate amongst people, which was just outstanding, and you saw the results. So I think number one way to spark a movement is to come up with a topic that fuels debate, divides the world into two different parts. One is black, one is white, and people can talk about. So with that, we can move to the next way to create a consumer movement, which is to give them a figurehead to follow. And of course, there are lots of examples out there. If you look at Bono from U2, which was all about, debt alleviation in the world. So there is a face out there. On every campaign in India, I think these guys do a fantastic job in terms of coming up with figureheads for the UNICEF campaign, for this campaign, for that campaign. For Obama was the figurehead for change. Imran Khan tried to do that in Pakistan. There are so many out there, Martin Luther King is the figurehead for the American movement on the civil rights. Similarly, of course, in my own way, I've had the privilege to be part of one such movement where when I was working on Safeguard, which is a brand that I'm sure a lot of Pakistanis are familiar with out there, we were working on this brand, which is an antibacterial brand, and the whole idea was to inspire a hygiene movement. And to tell the concept of germs to kids, you don't see germs, you don't see the germs going away, so it's an invisible benefit. So we came up with this idea to come up with a figurehead called Commander Safeguard, who's fighting the germs, and of course, his rivals out there, germs, each germ character was given a name and a face. So many of you would know in Pakistan that the germ king called Dirtu, inspired from the word dirt. So it was all about Commander Safeguard and Dirtu's epic rivalry. And the moment we give it a figurehead and made it sticky in kids' own language, it created a movement that probably I have never experienced again in my life, and I think it would be a very difficult act to follow. So again, I'm going to share a video with you that when the movement clicks, what it looks like. And here is an example of Commander Safeguard movement, which was being celebrated in schools. We were doing hygiene education programs or school education program across 20,000 schools in Pakistan. And Commander Safeguard became a rage, became part of the pop culture for kids. And they wanted to be part of Commander Safeguard Army. They wanted to imitate him. They wanted to be part of this movement. And let's see what that looks like.
नहाने जाओ जरासीम धो डालो जब सेहतमंद रहोगे तब है सबके लिए फरमान सफाई है निस्फी ईमान।
आज मैं आपको बताता हूँ कि जरासीम क्या होते हैं। मैं हूँ कुलसुमा, मैं हूँ कचरा रानी।
नहाने जाओ जरासीम धो डालो जब सेहतमंद रहोगे तब है सबके लिए फरमान सफाई है निस्फी ईमान। ईमान अपना मजबूत बनाओ सफाई की आदत। हमारा सेफगार्ड पाकिस्तान।
So that is a very deep and personal story for me because, when we were doing all this work on Commander Safeguard and the whole hygiene movement, Pak Pakistan, etc., back in 2003 or 2004-05 actually, I wish I'd learned or heard the term movements back then, because what we were experiencing was actually a movement, but we were just not articulating it that way. And the big idea here is, I think with these movements, they generally start small, they generally start with a spark, and they need to be refueled. I still remember when we did Commander Safeguard animation for the first time, we put it on air during a summer, just for the heck of it. Schools were coming to an end and our school program was getting interrupted. We said that let's put it on air maybe 1 week. And we put it on air and, we didn't even know what was happening. And a week later, first time I knew that we had hit a movement or something to that sort was when we got one letter from a father saying that, my kid has seen this animation of Commander Safeguard on air, and since then he's insisting that he wants to see it again. Then we got another letter. Then my salespeople came out to me and said, we want the same thing. And suddenly we knew that we were sitting on some kind of a movement out here. And here we followed it up with a lot of refueling, with another episode of Commander Safeguard, with the next episode of Dur 2, with the next episode of Pak Pakistan. And then, really it sparked into a movement which I think is a tough act to follow as far as Pakistan marketing is concerned. So again, we are down 2 ways of creating movement. One is to fuel a debate. Second one is to create a figurehead that people can follow. Let's see what the third one is. If you move to the next line. All right, this is an interesting one. If you want people to be part of a social movement or a participation movement, either you give them something to debate or you give them a figurehead or give them a desirable destination. Just give them a destination, and I think again I'd go back to the civil rights movement. The good part about Martin Luther King's historic address in Washington was that there was no Facebook out there. There was no advertising. There were not even posters that he had printed that at this point in time, this day, this date, you need to be there. But he gave people a destination that everybody had to get collected at a certain point in Washington, D.C., on a certain date, at a certain time, communicated from one person to the other through a word of mouth. And once people got that desirable destination, they all showed up. And that's how a movement is created. I think another great example that I'd share with you about a brand that has given people a destination to chase is T-Mobile, which is a mobile phone company, mobile phone operator in the US and in UK. So this example is about T-Mobile sing-alongs. It's based on a very wonderful insight which came from UK, if I remember correctly. The insight was that, in UK with the tube stations and everything, with the iPods, people were getting disconnected from each other. So here is an idea which brings people along under the umbrella of Lives for Sharing. And what they did was they created these events for people out there, gave them a certain destination where they needed to be, and activated and operationalized or mobilized them behind the idea of participation. So let's just see what Lives for Sharing looks like from T-Mobile. I think it's a 2-minute long video.
We launched T-Mobile's Lives for Sharing campaign in January 2009 with a spontaneous dance at London's Liverpool Street Station. It became an event the public felt compelled to share and had people on social media saying how much they would have loved to be part of it. So when we were tasked with creating the next phase of Lives for Sharing, a pan-European campaign to run across 7 different markets, we decided to put the public to the test. We sent out SMS messages to tell people a new T-Mobile event was going to happen, but not what it would be. All they knew was to be in Trafalgar Square at 6 p.m. on April the 30th. Astonishingly, 13,500 people turned up. And it was then that we handed out thousands of microphones and revealed that we'd all be singing karaoke.
We've just got a text to say we should be here. I just think it's going to be really wild getting everybody doing something.
International news shared the moment with us. 7 different brand commercials were created featuring market-specific content. 2 of those were on air within 48 hours of the event ending.
All right, so that was one example that I just shared, which is giving them a desirable destination. I think we are, how many rules down? I think we are 3 ways down. Let's talk about the 4th one. Either you've given them something to debate on, or you've given them a figurehead, and or you've given them a destination to reach at, or what you can do is then give them an inspiring cause that they can all believe in. You know, because human beings, at the end of the day, we are all task driven. If we give them a certain task, you know, people suddenly get focused and we start collecting and all those kind of things. So again, I have lots of examples out there. I think one such example comes from Pampers, which is a Procter & Gamble brand, which came up with this mission to eradicate tetanus from Africa, where every pack of Pampers is equal to 1 vaccine being donated through UNICEF. And once consumers get that they are part of something big, you know, gives them an inspiring cause, it really helps them. We all remember how these ribbons out there were invented by Avon against the idea of eradicating, you know, breast cancer. What I'm going to share here is one example, which we're going to run through it pretty fast. I don't know which one is it. I think, let's just play. Okay, just hold on. This is a very interesting one. This is one such example of people being part of an interesting cause. This one is a campaign invented by Saatchi & Saatchi in Brazil, and the whole idea was water conservation. And the campaign was called Pee in the Shower, encouraging people to pee in their shower such that we could save almost 1 million gallons of water, which could be used for other purposes. And they came up with a campaign. Again, a very inspiring cause. You know, people were divided. Either you were peeing in the shower or you were not peeing in the shower. It kind of checked all the boxes for me because it created a debate. It didn't have a figurehead, but let's just see what it looks like.
Coisas do além, lendas brasileiras, lendas gregas, pessoas boas, pessoas não tão boas, gênios da arte, gênios da ciência, amantes, pessoas de outros planetas, fenômenos do cinema. Enfim, se você faz xixi, tá convidado. Faça xixi no banho, ajude a Mata Atlântica.
Again, I think a fantastic example, and you can decide if you want to pee in the shower or if you don't. You know, it can spark a debate right here, but we wouldn't get into that because we are running out of time. I think the 5th one is give them an irresistible challenge that needs the group to complete, because that's where the group dynamics come into play. And I think I talked about this whole idea that we had on Pampers, which is no one woman or no one mom could finish or eradicate tetanus from Africa, but if all new moms came together and started buying Pampers, every pack would translate into 1 vaccine. And that's where, if the sum of the parts is greater, if the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I think this is where we can get moms to participate. So we'd share one other example very quickly, and then we'd hit the end.
Let your mommy sleep into the night until we rise. Hush, child, let me soothe the shiny tears that gather in your eyes.
I think a wonderful idea, getting moms together, and if every mom knew that it's not her act alone that's going to eradicate tetanus, moms coming together and the group knowing that it's the sum of their parts that's going to solve the whole, that also inspires some form of a social movement. Number 6, which is the last one, and there can be many more, but these are just 6 that have worked for me. Number 6 is to give them a new group that they can join and identify with. I think, you know, Facebook has done that. Either you're a Facebooker or you're not. We tried to do that with Commander Safeguard. We created that Commander Safeguard army. So either a kid was part of Commander Safeguard army or he was not part of Commander Safeguard army. Either you are part of IBA or you're not. Either you are wearing a Livestrong band or you are not. I think those optical acts that come out there and divide people into, or associate people with certain groups that also inspire movement. And I think this is done very successfully with a lot of political parties, but they could also be done for brands. Like, as I said earlier, either you are part of the group that is peeing in the shower, or you're not part of the group that's peeing in the shower, and that can inspire a lot of user-generated content. So I think if we just wrap it up, you know, as I said at the very outset, movements is the new name of the game. It's not about yelling to sell. As marketers, the challenge for us is to create content that the consumer would love to see again, would feel comfortable forwarding to her friend's network or his friend's network, and would love to improve upon. So that's where the user-generated content comes in. So as we saw in Commander Safeguard, when we did that, there were a lot of spoofs that come out there. So I think these are 6 humble ways that have worked for me, creating a movement. I wish I could do it again. It's a tough act to follow what we did on Commander Safeguard here. We are, though, trying to do that, and that is where I'd like to end. We may not have time for questions, but what we are working on right now, the good part about a movement is that if the idea is strong enough that it can live for longer, you can always come back and spark it. So as we have started to reactivate the hygiene movement on Safeguard, our anti-bac soap brand, we have just created a piece of content that we hope becomes part of the pop culture. It's just gone on air a couple of days back. I think my folks were telling me that it's already started to receive a lot of likes on the Facebook. So kind of it restores my confidence in the idea of creating movements. Let's take a look at that content, and probably this is where we'd end.
बेटा रायान, यहीं से शुरू हुई थी तहरीक पाकिस्तान.
Tehreek is movement for those who...
आओ आज फिर एक तहरीक चलाएं, अपना प्यारा देश बनाएं.
आओ फिर तहरीक चलाएं, प्यारे देश में अपने सफाई की आदत आम बनाएं.
पाक पाक पाकिस्तान, साफ साफ पाकिस्तान, हर पल हर दम अज़म हमारा सेफगार्ड पाकिस्तान.
जरासीम से करो बचाओ, हर रोज नहाने जाओ. जरासीम धो डालो जब सेहतमंद रहोगे तब.
है सबके लिए फरमान, सफाई है निस्फ़ ईमान. ईमान अपना मजबूत बनाओ, सफाई की आदत अपनाओ. हाँ, मिलकर अब तुम कदम बढ़ाओ, मुल्क को अपने साफ बनाओ. आने वाले कल की खातिर आज अपना फर्ज निभाओ.
हम सबकी बने पहचान, सेहतमंद पाकिस्तान. आओ नई पहचान बनाए, सफाई का परचम लहराए. पाक पाक पाकिस्तान, साफ साफ पाकिस्तान, हर पल हर दम अज़म हमारा सेफगार्ड पाकिस्तान. सेफगार्ड की शील्ड उठाओ, जरासीम को मार भगाओ. वतन को हेल्दी करना है तो खुद को हेल्दी करके दिखाओ.
सबको कर दो हैरान, करके तुम ये ऐलान. सेहतमंद पाकिस्तान, सेफगार्ड पाकिस्तान.
पाक पाक पाकिस्तान, साफ साफ पाकिस्तान, हर पल हर दम अज़म हमारा सेफगार्ड पाकिस्तान. पाक पाक पाकिस्तान, साफ साफ पाकिस्तान, हर पल हर दम अज़म हमारा.
सेफगार्ड सेहत और सफाई मिशन अब हमारा है. सेहतमंद पाकिस्तान, सेफगार्ड पाकिस्तान.
So yeah, here is what we are trying to do on Safeguard again. And I think this is a hygiene movement trying to eradicate all the infectious illnesses out there which are inexcusable to be there in this world today. So thank you very much. I think in closing, I just want to thank Ms. Yasmin again, Ejazmia again, and for the group here for being a patient listener. And that's about it. I hope we inspire a lot of movements in Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Aziz, for that insightful discussion on consumer movements. We would now move towards the final presentation for the ICM 2014. I believe no words could ever do justice to the magnitude of contribution and expertise that this particular individual has had with Pepsi over the past 15 years. Being a graduate of Bennington, her expertise was required in the Philippines and to manage Pepsi's beverages portfolio in the Afghanistan and Pakistan region. Please put your hands together for the amazing marketing director of Pepsi, Ms. Maliha Subhani.